Hi everyone, welcome to Newegg TV. My name is Paul and today I'm going to be doing an unboxing and overview of this new motherboard from GIGABYTE. This is the GIGABYTE Z77-HD3. This is a standard ATX motherboard based on the LGA 1155 socket, so it's going to support both second generation Sandy Bridge processors from Intel as well as third generation Ivy Bridge processors. Some of the features of the board will be turned on or off depending on which type of processor you use. So this is definitely geared a bit more towards the third generation Ivy Bridge processors with the Z77 chipset. But for instance, if you have a third generation Ivy Bridge processor, you'll be able to make use of the Pci Express Gen 3 compatibility, whereas the second gen Sandy Bridge processors will give you Pci Express Gen 2 support. Also, if you go with an unlocked K SKU CPU, you will be able to overclock it using the overclocking features of the motherboard. But let's talk a little bit more about the UD spec from GIGABYTE as well as the HD moniker in this actual product name because HD you might not have seen before. This is simply referring to the actual video outputs on this motherboard because they do give you some high definition digital outputs such as HDMI as well as DVI. This is still a UD series motherboard, so it does still feature GIGABYTE's ultra durable construction, which will give you some added peace of mind as far as the components on the motherboard as well as the construction. Let's go over some of these fancy logos and whatnot that we have down here. First off, this board does feature a UEFI rather than a BIOS, although often it's referred to as a UEFI BIOS, just so people don't get confused, because UEFI is newer, BIOS is kind of older. But the newer BIOS will give you a much faster boot times, as well as the capability, for instance, to boot off of hard drives that are larger than 2.2 terabytes. It's also Windows 8 ready, so you can, by way of the Windows 8 installation, get yourself some really quick boot times, combining the newer features of the BIOS with Windows 8. So that's another awesome feature. It has GIGABYTE's 3D BIOS, so that actually gives you a 3D display of the components on the motherboard for a little bit easier BIOS navigation. You can, of course, switch back to the old school advanced mode if you are more familiar with UEFI configurations and how to set that up. As mentioned, some high def output, so you get HDMI, DVI, as well as a D-sub connector. For the UD construction or ultra durable, you get all solid capacitors. As mentioned, this is going to support both second and third gen Intel Core processors, Z77 chipset included, which gives you some cool features such as a couple serial ATA revision 3 6 gigabit per second ports. You also have, well, coming back to the ultra durable construction, humidity protection, electrostatic protection, power failure protection, and high temperature protection. Also a glass fabric PCB construction, which is going to do some stuff like help you with some humidity protection. All right, so we have some more stuff here on the back. Some of it I have already sort of commented on a little bit on the front. But again, some more Z77 chipset features. You do get Intel Smart Response technology, so you can use an SSD up to 64 gigabytes. Set that up as a caching drive for your mechanical hard drive. It gives it much faster response time and will give you, generally speaking, a better computing experience because things will happen more quickly. You also have, well, smart response technology, that's the same thing. Here's a quick layout of the board and all the inputs and outputs and connectors. I'm going to be going over it in detail in just a moment, so we won't spend too much time there. Here's all the protections I already mentioned with the UD construction, a little bit more details on those. And then finally, oh wait, I did want to point out we get some on-off charging USB ports, so you can, even when your system's off, you can still charge your devices. One fuse per USB port. Some other features like that GIGABYTE has worked in. Oh, I should also point out you do get two-way Crossfire X. You can also support two-way SLI configurations on this motherboard, so you can go with the onboard graphics in your Sandy Bridge or Ivy Bridge processor if you buy one that has onboard graphics, and with that you can make use of the video outs that are on the board itself. And then if you want to go with a discrete graphics card, you can do that, of course, just as well. Finally, in the lower left here, we have some more detailed specs. If you want to take a closer look at those, you can pause for just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and proceed with an unboxing. Taking a look inside the box for accessories, of course, we have some documentation. So this is your all-important motherboard user's manual. It's going to include some really key information that you should keep on hand and available while you're doing your build. Layout of the board, of course. GIGABYTE likes to do a block diagram, which I always like to see what's connected where. Finally, some detailed specs on the hardware components, and then further on you'll get more installation procedures, such as which memory slots to install your DIMMs to, especially to make sure you'll take advantage of the dual channel capabilities. You also get your 7 series utility DVD. So this is going to have your drivers as well as some software on it. I would recommend going to the GIGABYTE website to download the latest versions of these drivers rather than using the ones that are on the disk. but you can use a disk to get yourself up and running, in particular to get your network card set up with the driver. That's important to have. You also get a multilingual installation book right there, so if English is not your first language, hopefully you speak one of the ones in there. You get a Gigabyte case badge if you like to put case badges on. There it is. You also get 4 serial ATA cables. These have the little clasps on one end. You get 2 that have straight plugs on both ends, and then you get 2 that have a straight plug on one end and a 90-degree angled plug on the other end. So some nice options there for serial ATA connectivity, and these will of course be compatible with serial ATA revision 1, 2, or 3. So if you do have an SSD or something high-end on a SATA Rev 3 connection, you can use those. Finally, input-output shield here, basic silver I/O shield, and it's got some indentations there to point out what's what. Next up, we have the motherboard. Taking a closer look at the motherboard in detail, I first wanted to point out color scheme, of course. We have a blue PCB in the back, some lighter blue connectors here for the DIMM slots as well as the PCI slots, and then some white in there overall. Gray on some of the heat sinks as well as some of the components such as the chokes that are right up there. I also want to point out this is actually slightly smaller than a standard ATX. We have the same height, which is 12 inches. Side to side though, it's actually about 8.5 inches as opposed to 9.6 inches, which a standard ATX motherboard is. So it does give a little bit more space and a little bit more flexibility with this board if you're installing it, particularly if it's a slightly smaller case. Here's a quick look at the back. As you can see, just a closer look at that PCB finish and the blue color. Of course, the heat sinks on the board are held on by plastic push pins, so those push through the bottom. You can remove those if it becomes necessary in the future. You just got to kind of squeeze those little plastic push pins, and then you can pop the heat sinks off. Finally, here from the front of the board, quick look at the fan connectors. You do have 2 right here, so there's a CPU fan and a system fan header right there, another system fan header right here next to the 24 pin, and then one more system fan header down here at the bottom. So that gives you enough for 3 case fans as well as a CPU fan to connect, and all of those are 4-pin PWM capable fan connectors, so very nice there. Let's move on with some more details. We're going to start down here in the very bottom right hand corner of the board. Here you have your front panel connectors in that little recessed area. Bear in mind those are color coded, and there's a little chart down there beneath it so you can get a better idea of what plugs in where. If you need some more help, you can check out the motherboard manual. Also, you have a clear Cmos header, those 2 little pinouts right there, so you can use jumper to cap that and clear your Cmos if you need to reset it to factory defaults. Next up, you have a couple USB 2.0 headers, so each of those will be able to connect to 2 USB 2.0 ports. There's that system fan header that I already pointed out. We also have a COM header, trusted platform module header, I should say, right there. COM header right here. Finally, front panel audio, so that will support AC97 or HD audio for front panel connections. Also, the audio chip on this board, which is a Realtek ALC887, does support 7.1 channel audio out, but you need to do that by way of the audio front panel connector with a compatible HD audio device in order to enable that multi-channel surround. Apart from that, you can get 5.1 by default out of the existing analog connectors. Moving up to the PCI Express area. So as you will note, we have 2 full-length PCI Express X16 slots. We have 2 small PCI Express X1 slots. Then we have 2 legacy PCI slots. If you have some older PCI devices, you can plug them in right there. Spacing here is triple slot, so if you're going with a dual slot video card, and if you are going to go take advantage of the dual video card capabilities, such as setting up Crossfire X, you should get an extra bit of space here to provide some extra airflow for the cards, or that does give you the option to go with a triple slot cooler on the card you might be connecting. Also, I should point out, this top slot here is wired up for X16. This one's wired for X8, but especially with PCI Express Gen 3, that should give you plenty of bandwidth for any type of video card you might be connecting. Moving to the right, we have this Gigabyte logoed heatsink right there, and that is right on top of the Z77 chipset. Z77 chipset is going to be controlling a variety of things on the motherboard, but most notably are going to be your serial ATA connectors right here. Bear in mind these are pointing straight out, so if you are going with a 2 GPU configuration, you will want to make sure that you don't have a conflict there depending on the length of your card. The 2 white ports here are SATA Revision 3, 6 gigabits per second. The light blue ports are SATA Revision 2, 3 gigabits per second. So if you are going with a high-end SSD, definitely connect it to one of those two upper white ports. And I would also recommend switching your controller mode to either AHCI or RAID mode in order to make sure you're getting the best performance out of that. Here's your dual BIOS chips, so you got both of them soldered on right there. You can switch back and forth between them, so you can have kind of a standard BIOS and then a backup. Or you could, for instance, set up an overclock setting on one and a stock setting on the other and be able to switch back and forth. Moving up the side of the board, right up here we have a USB 3.0 front panel connector, so the 20-pin block right there, which you can plug in, and that's located close to the front of the case, which should be an ideal configuration in most situations. But that will allow you to enable a couple USB 3.0 ports on the front. There's that fan header on the side that I already mentioned. 24-pin main motherboard power connector right there, so that is where you route over the power from your power supply. And then to the left of that, we have our DDR3 DIMM slots. Now bear in mind, this is going to support dual channel DDR3 memory. It will support DIMM sizes up to 8 gigabytes. So each DIMM you install here, a dual inline memory module, can be up to 8 gigabytes in capacity. That gives you up to 32 gigabytes total. You do want to go with DDR3 memory. It's recommended to use 1.5 volts. You do have support for XMP profiles, so if you get memory that supports Intel's extreme memory profile setup, you can go into the BIOS. So for instance, if you have 1600 speed memory, you can go into the BIOS, plug in that XMP profile, and it should set your memory to the proper configuration. Speaking of the speeds of the memory supported, 1066, 1333, and 1600. The 1600 is supported if you are using an Ivy Bridge processor, because those do support some higher memory frequencies. Also, remember to purchase your memory in sets of 2, because you will want to install in the color-coded slots like this, so the 2 white slots, for example, or the 2 blue slots. Purchase your memory in identical pairs to make sure you can take advantage of the added bandwidth of dual channel. To the left of that, we have our main CPU socket right there. So again, that's going to support both 2nd and 3rd generation Intel Core processors, that being Sandy Bridge or Ivy Bridge. You have your power delivery around that, and that's going to be, of course, pushing power to the processor. You do have some overclocking capabilities with this motherboard. You also have another gray heatsink with the ultra durable logo on it up there at the top, so that's going to provide some extra cooling for the components providing power to the CPU. Keeping those nice and cool will enable you to have a bit more stable performance and stable overclocking if you're going to go that route. Finally, an 8-pin supplemental CPU power connector up here in the top left, so definitely make sure you plug that in and route that cable over from your power supply. Lastly, we have our inputs and outputs here on the side, so this is where your I/O shield would be covering on the back of your case. Couple USB 2.0 ports right here, a combo port here for mouse or keyboard, that's a PS2. Here are your HD audio connection points, so you have HDMI, and that can provide both audio as well as video connection, and bear in mind you can also get your Dolby audio via the HDMI connection. This is a DVI connector right here. This is digital only, so bear in mind you cannot use one of those DVI to VGA adapters with this port. If you do need a VGA connection or an analog VGA signal, you can connect to that blue port right there. Both of these digital connectors will support resolutions up to 1920 by 1200. You get a couple more USB 3.0 ports here on the back, a couple more USB 2.0 ports, so that gives you 4 here by way of the I/O on the back of the motherboard. Finally, a gigabit Ethernet provided by Realtek, and then you have your analog audio connectors. And that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys. Once again, this has been the GIGABYTE Z77-HD3 motherboard featuring the Z77 chipset and the 1155 socket for 2nd or 3rd generation Intel Core processors. I'm Paul with Newegg TV, and if you enjoyed today's video, you can find more on our Newegg YouTube channel. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time.